Hi, my name is Alex, and I'm going to be doing my investigative project on Dakota, and it's a welded piece of art. Welding has been used in creating artwork since the 1930s and is now gaining widespread popularity. John Lopez is a modern weld artist. One of his pieces, Dakota, is an example of how intricate and symbolic weld sculptures can be. The hard work and creativity can be seen in the way that he creates a lifelike metal bison as a memorial to the history of South Dakota. Weld art is gaining more popularity, and while it may break away from classic definition of art, it should be discussed in art classes as a form of an art medium. Typically, people only see welding as a trade. However, it takes a lot of skill and creativity as seen in the sculpture Dakota. John Lopez was born and raised in South Dakota and had grown up around large animals his whole life, allowing him to create life-size sculptures of them in great accuracy. He created Dakota and his other pieces from scrap metal gathered from local farms and blends them together to make a work of art not dissimilar to blending a palette of paint. He combines the methods of molded sculpture and assemblage to create his finalized pieces. When he first starts, he begins with a clay model that later turns into a life-size bronze sculpture. Each piece of metal was gathered from scrapyards. For this specific piece, the frame was made from metal from an oil well pipe with materials such as cable wire, sheet metal, chain, and sickle guards. Creating a work of art out of scrap metal takes a lot of skill and knowledge. Not only do you have to know how to weld and work each piece into the bigger picture, but you have to understand the components of different metals and how they are best used. For example, you have to know that great cast iron is very hard and brittle, and therefore cannot be bent or hammered. Or that although stainless steel can be heated for bending, but if not cooled over a long period of time, will actually crack. The closer you look at Dakota, the more you see in this type of detail. You begin to notice things that you didn't see before. The artist uses the elements of metal to build a life-size bison, using this material to represent the strength and structure of the animal. The position that Lopez created the bison in is a stance of power, as if he is ready to face an adversary. The different metal types create the texture of the bison that make it appear alive. Chain is used to create the appearance of hair and fur, and the different shades and layering of each metal type allow the audience to keep finding new symbols integrated in the original sculpture. While classic bronze sculptures are often smooth and rely on perfect symmetry, this sculpture uses the idea of layers and roughness of the metals to make it even more realistic. The artist created this piece as a memorial to the bison that used to roam the land, an essential part of the life on the prairie, to give them the justice and admiration they deserve. Not only does the sculpture praise the majestic animals, but also holds a lot of history. The Sioux tribe that eventually settled in North Dakota relied heavily on the bison and viewed them as a sacred animal. When they began to be overhunted and disappeared, it was devastating for their lifestyle. This symbolism and history is encompassed in the animal itself, as well as the bronze castings physically found on the bison. The artist pays homage to the land by incorporating a bald eagle on the side of the bison, while also showing the more recent history by displaying Mount Rushmore on its spine. Other bronze castings are hidden throughout the bison that tell the history of South Dakota. One piece of art that compares to weld art is a sculpture of Zeus or Poseidon from ancient Greece, created around 460 to 450 BCE. This is a famous work of art that is known around the world and is considered a classical piece. The sculpture represents the perfect, tall, lean body that many ancient Greeks worshipped. The sculpture represents one of the two powerful gods in the ancient Greek culture. The power of Zeus, or Poseidon, is reinforced in the stance of the sculpture, where he has one foot forward. This stance is similar to that of the bison Dakota, and even though it's a little different because we are comparing a person to an animal, it goes to show how universal the stance of power really is. This classical work of art is the typical image that you see in your mind when you hear the word sculpture. But it is not that much different from weld art. Like weld art, it requires the mastery of a material that would not be thought of as a malleable metal, one of the strongest materials there is. It also captures the history of ancient Greeks, demonstrating their view on gods and what they value in a person, much like Dakota, which stands for what the Native Americans valued. The way that it was created is also similar to that of the weld art sculpture. Zeus or Poseidon was most likely created using lost wax castings method by a skilled craftsman. In this method, Molten bronze is carefully filled into a gap made from wax between a mold and a clay core. This creates a hollow bronze sculpture with thin metal walls. While this was not the method used for the majority of Dakota, as it was for life-size Zeus or Poseidon sculptures, this was similar to the method used to make the bronze castings found along the side of the Great Bison. This just shows how great Dakota integrates the methods that have been used for centuries to create the piece that we hold to the greatest standards to this day. The second piece that I will compare with Dakota is Petit Homage Stack 8 by Ann Page. This piece shows how new technologies are changing the way we look at art. This piece uses a three-dimensional printer to create the individual pieces that are stacked on top of each other to create the final look. This work of art combines the geometric pieces with the wooden base to create a contrast between nature and technology. The use of 3D printer to create art is something that is also gaining popularity and is not a typical art media or method. In fact, computer-aided design and three-dimensional printers are technologies that were created for industries such as engineering and construction. However, they are now being integrated into the art world. This is similar to Dakota, which uses unusual techniques to create artwork. Like Petit Homage Stack 8, Dakota uses unique materials and the methods to convey its message to the audience. The weld sculpture Dakota by John Lopez is a symbol of the majestic beast that used to roam the open prairie of South Dakota and the history that surrounds it. Not only does it encompass the essence of South Dakota, but it took knowledge of artwork as well as high skills in welding and metalwork. This is a breathtaking example of the power of weld art, and sculpture such as Dakota should be an art form that is discussed more in classes and treated not just as a trade, but as an art form.